Welcome to the Smart Writing Goals workshop presented by the Graduate Writing Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. Today we're going to be talking about the SMART, or Smart Writing Goals format, in order to help you attack dissertation writing. Please note that even though this presentation is largely centered about how to use SMART goals to attack your dissertation, this same framework can be used to help you achieve your goals with other large writing projects. So before we start today, I want you to take some time to consider a time when you set a large non-academic goal for yourself, right? So pause this video and think about a large goal that you've had to set and achieve in your life. Did you achieve your goal? If so, how did you achieve it? And what were the steps you took to get there? So like I said, pause the video, take some time to think about these and reflect, and then we'll talk about one specific framework you could take in order to achieve large goals. So the objective of this video is to help you set attainable goals towards completing your dissertation using the SMART format. Note again that even though the SMART format can be used to complete a large writing project like a dissertation, it can also be used to set goals for other large writing projects that aren't a dissertation. So before we move on to actually talking about what the SMART format is, I want you to think about what's problematic about the statement, "Today I'm going to write my dissertation." If you were being more realistic, how might you reframe this statement and why? So again, take a minute to pause the video and reflect on what's problematic about writing your dissertation as a goal, and how might you reframe that goal. Once you're done thinking about it, you can click back to unpause the video and watch the remainder. So when we think about large goals like writing a dissertation, the reason it can be really problematic is because the goals are so big, we don't know where to start. This is where the SMART goals format really comes in handy. So SMART goals come from business management theory, and their intention is to help you break down a really big goal, like writing your dissertation, into smaller, more achievable chunks. It can also help you measure and maintain accountability when taking on a really large project. So let's get into it. The reason it's called SMART is because each letter stands for a specific part of the SMART process that you're supposed to go through. So S stands for specific. And what this means is when you have a large goal, you want to be able to break it down into smaller subtasks within the larger task, right? So let's think about something concrete like a dissertation. You don't just write a single dissertation and it's one singular document. It's broken down into parts, right? There's a methods section, there's an intro section, things like that. So the point of the SMART goals framework is to take something big like a dissertation and figure out what those smaller parts are, right? So one example of this might be writing a dissertation's introduction that links childhood obesity to the consumption of sugary drinks. You're not writing the whole dissertation, you're just thinking about the introduction as a smaller, more achievable part of that large goal. So once you've determined the subtasks of your goal, the next thing you have to do is figure out how are you going to measure whether or not you've achieved that goal. So the M in SMART stands for measurable. A common method of doing this is by designating a set of pages you might want to write. And you can generate a checklist to assess if there are other components that you need to achieve, right? So one example of creating a measurable aspect of your goals is to say, not just I'm going to write my introduction, but I'm going to write a 10-page section that links childhood obesity to the consumption of sugary drinks. So now I have a page count to be able to determine whether or not I have met my goal of writing that smaller section that I've defined. The next thing you want to do is make sure that your goal is attainable. So the A in SMART stands for attainable. So what this means is you need to determine how you're going to achieve your goal. And this usually means breaking down your larger goal into a set of sub-goals. So when you do this, note that each sub-goal should build on the one before or after it. And you don't want to set a goal that has too many subtasks embedded in it. right? So when I think about something big, like a dissertation, the first thing I do is I break it down into smaller parts. So I've identified the introduction. And then the next thing I want to do is determine how I'm going to measure that. So it's going to be 10 pages long. And then the next thing I want to do is figure out, okay, what are the sub goals within that 10 pages, right? So the first one might be gathering studies on childhood obesity to prepare to write, and then actually doing the writing of that section. So once you've taken the specific goal, in this case, writing an introduction, that you've defined for your larger project, and you've broken that specific goal into even smaller sub-goals, the next thing you need to do is ensure that each of those smaller sub-goals is relevant, right? And what this basically means is, am I giving myself sub-goals that are on task or not? So, for example, just writing an annotated bibliography in general might not help you write an introduction that links childhood obesity to sugar consumption. However, creating a specific annotated bibliography that links childhood obesity to sugar consumption might be something you have to do in order to then gather research and do the writing that will comprise the introduction to your dissertation. So the point of this part of the SMART process is just to ensure that any subtask you set for yourself is relevant to the overall goal you set during the specificity part of the SMART goal process. The final letter in SMART is T, and that stands for time bound. So once you've determined all of the smaller attainable goals within your larger goal, you want to prioritize those and set deadlines for completing each goal. So note that you need to know the purpose of all of your subsections and understand that each sub-goal you set doesn't necessarily carry the same amount of weight. So you want to consider how much time each subtask will need in order to appropriately be completed. So for example, you might schedule 2 hours a day for 10 days to gather studies on childhood obesity, and then write a 10-page section that links childhood obesity to the consumption of sugary drinks, which might take another day or two. And within each of those 2 days, you might need 2 or 4 hours of writing, depending on how quickly you write once you've done your research. So now that we've talked about the SMART framework and what the various components of it are, let's use another example to revisit each of these components and make sure we fully understand them. So with this new example, we're going to start at the beginning with S. S again stands for specific. So I'm trying to determine what is the specific goal within my much larger project that I want to attack first. And in this case, I'm trying to revise the background of the problem in my dissertation in order to establish the historical and legal context for inclusive schooling, students with emotional and behavioral disorder labels, and teacher education for inclusive practices of students with those labels. Once I have the specific goal I want to target, the next thing I need to do is figure out how I'm going to measure if I've met that goal. So in this case, I'll know that I've done this when I have all 3 of these specific components established with accurate laws and historical reviews cited. So in this case, we're not using a page measurement to measure whether or not I've hit my goal. Instead, I'm using a more qualitative measurement to see if I have properly revised the background of my paper. So once I have my smaller sub-goal, now I go to A, which stands for attainable, and I'm trying to break that down further into smaller sub-goals that I can attack. So the first one is to gather historical and legal research on inclusive schooling, emotional behavior disorder labels, and teacher education for inclusive practices of students with those labels. Once I've completed that, I then need to read the research on historical and legal research on inclusive schooling, emotional behavior disorder labels, and teacher education for inclusive practices of students with those labels. So I'm gathering research, I'm reading the research, and then I'm going to write the background with all of those components. Once I have my smaller, more attainable goals, I then want to make sure that they are relevant and time-bound, right? So I'm going to make sure that I'm purposefully annotating what I read to call out the historical and legal citations on the various components of my research that I care about. And then I set times for each of the sub-goals that I determined in the slide before, right? So I might take 4 hours to do the research, 9 hours in order to do the reading, and then 6 hours to do the writing. So when I pull all of these things together, what I end up with is a set of very well refined, measurable, and time-bound goals that direct me exactly what I have to do in what amount of time in order to reach my larger goal. So first I need to schedule 4 hours to gather research on inclusive schooling, emotional behavior disorder labels, and teacher education for inclusive practices of students with those labels. Then I need to schedule 9 hours to read and annotate that research to call out the historical and legal citations. And then finally, I need to schedule 6 hours to write the background of the problem on these various factors. And I have ways of knowing if I've hit these specific goals because I've already determined whether or not I'm going to be successful during the measurement part of my SMART goals. And then by saying I want to have all these things done by a specific date, I know not only specifically what I have to do and how long it's going to take me, but I'm also going to know when it will be done by. So that's it. Now you have all the tools you need in order to take a large goal that you have in your own life or academic writing and be able to break them down into smaller, more attainable, more measurable, and more easy to attack components that you can understand and take on one at a time. So think about a large goal that you want to achieve. Break it down into 2 to 3 SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And once you have it written down, set yourself a good due date. And good luck writing. We wish you the best, and if you ever need more help, you always have the Graduate Writing Center at Teachers College available to you to further support you in your academic writing.